Hello, everyone. I hope you are having a great afternoon. Welcome to the new normal. With government relaxing the movement of key sectors, including movement of non-essential e-commerce services and more, life is moving on while we all adjust to the new normal. An interesting fact, notably even during the 62 and 71 wars, Indian Railways never stopped their services. So possibly this is the biggest pause in the consumer travel in the history of India and possibly globally. In this 10th episode of AMA of Startup versus COVID-19 series, we are talking about one of the most impacted sectors by COVID. We are talking about travel, travel tech, and its implications. We are talking on surviving the Great Depression of travel. So, without further await, I would like to welcome Alok Bajpai and Rajneesh Kumar, co-founders of ixigo. Ixigo, launched in 2007, amidst another crisis, is an intelligent AI-based travel app. The company commands more than 170 million users, which they count as travelers, and are backed by marquee investors like Make My Trip, Sequoia India, and more. So, Alok, Rajneesh, welcome to the show.
Hi,
Thank you.
thank you.
And starting on the lighter note, I don't know what the lighter note is in this context. So, starting on within the span of past 1 month, past 1.5 months, when was that feeling, which when it hit you, like this is time for the plan B? So we talked about the plan B, and we read your post which you shared. What was that time frame? And I know it's very hard to put like that, but was that a particular day or a week, or that that moment where you were like, this is gone now?
It's very interesting in our context, Vaibhav. We've been having a very interesting last 12 months at ixigo. The company was growing really well organically. We were not spending a lot on marketing. We were, getting closer and closer to break even. And in January, we actually turned profitable, right? And when I say profitable, I mean, like net profit, EBITDA profitable, not unit level, which we always were. And February and March were really good months for us, right? So if you remember, February was a bumper month for aviation, right? And
Sure.
people had just, in fact, February you could see green shoots for most of the industrial activities, in the Indian context. So it was actually all really nice and rosy. In fact, the first week of March, and Rajneesh and I were just discussing this before this call, that first week of March in the history of ixigo, was probably the best week we've ever seen, both in terms of revenue and profit and growth. And though we could see Corona, starting to impact, the world around us, and we saw what had happened in China already, one would have not imagined that it would strike so quickly. Here in India, we felt rather insulated, looking at the very few cases, mostly in Kerala at that point, and we said, this is going to come, but it's going to come, maybe in a couple of months from now, right? So we were kind of mentally prepared that it's going to happen, but we were not as prepared as one would have, liked to be. So when it actually
Yeah.
hit us, second week of March, that this was going to, move in a similar direction and trajectory as everywhere else in the world, is when we actually got on our toes and said, hey, we actually need to now do the plan B right now, right? And this, we had many sleepless nights where we kind of got into those plan B discussions, and we actuated the plan B, third week of March, end of third week of March. So that's how things unfolded.
So was it like similar when you started the company in 2007 amidst another crisis, right? So initial days of company, when founders are brainstorming together, and there's hardly more visible parts and all the options are on the table. So was it the repeat of 2007 in some way in your mind, from the perception point of view?
I think it was a
Rajneesh, you
little
want to take it?
different. Yeah, I think it's a little bit different from that in the sense that this is a humanitarian crisis, number one. So some decisions that we took, we had to take that into account. For example, the decision to not let go of anybody
Sure.
was based on that. Second is that 2008-9 saw a dip in demand. Generally, activities were slowed down. But this is different because in a lockdown situation, travel has come to a complete grind, which means that everything is down to absolute zero. This is something that I don't think anybody has ever seen before. In the 2008-9 situation, there was ways of recovering where even if you are a smaller player, you could probably figure out different ways of capturing more market share, although the overall demand is lesser. But in this case,
Yeah.
there is no demand at all, right? And that makes this very, very tricky to handle, right? I mean, right now the situation is such that the only way out is to survive this, and to do that you need to extend your runway as much as possible, which essentially means that cash is king in this sort of a situation, and you need to conserve cash as possible. So once that happened, the first thing that we did is that, and I think this is something that everybody would have already done, if not already right now, is that you got to cut like cost really deeply, and do it right at the outset, rather than wait for months and weeks, right? So this is really, really important, because the closer you get to running out of cash, the worse it gets, because you don't really know what's going to happen next. So to that effect, we did lots of things, like we renegotiated contracts with
Sure.
almost all of our software vendors, brought
Hmm.
down costs significantly, got waivers, deferment, discounts on multiple things, whether it is office rent or infrastructure cost, or anything of that, for that matter. Even some of the services which were non-essential in nature, we were using, it is easy for you to get out of that at this point of time, because you can always trigger a force majeure, given the
Sure.
situation, right? So all of those things had to be done, and these had to be done fairly quickly. We had to kind of react super
So,
quickly. It was,
so
yeah,
Rajnish, before I go into the more technical, trends and what can be the future, and I particularly want to emphasize and touch upon this topic, which is on the emotional side. And why I'm doing this is because I've been talking to a lot of founders, who are really stressed out. Some on the verge of crying, or are actually crying. They don't know what to reply to investors. So, you being seasoned entrepreneurs, first I want to know, yes, was it an emotional moment? Was it vulnerability? Did you guys really felt helplessness for a minute? And how you in your mind kind of recovered from that, knowing that another 6 months can be very dark.
Yeah, I think it was definitely an emotional moment because you see both a demand shock and a supply shock coming at the same time, right? Right, when, like Rajnish said, 2008 crisis, you didn't really have both sides impacted at once. You only had, in fact, a funding shock, like the investment
Sure.
activity went down, and to some
Yeah.
extent you had a demand shock, which was temporary, right?
Yeah.
The supply was still there. Oil prices being low actually led to a travel boom in 2008, 9, 10. That's when the airlines grew really fast, right? So even
Hmm.
though we managed to survive by taking all the tough decisions collectively, the demand side kept growing, and we saw revenue upticking every month, month on month, right? So that sort of gave us a lot of hope and courage to keep carrying on. Here we were faced with a situation where it would look kind of certain that for the next 6 months, life is going to be very tough because travel is not going to bounce
Yeah.
back overnight. The first one that got impacted, in fact, international got impacted for us in February itself, and once the lockdown happened, domestic got impacted. And I think even though domestic may bounce back sooner, it's not going to be before, let's say, 4 to 6 months, right? And if international
Right.
bounces back, it's not going to be before 12 months. That's our early assessment of the situation, right? And when it
Sure.
bounces back, the bounce back will not be in the same shape and form. So it was an emotional moment because nobody is prepared for these things, right? It's like a black hole or a
Yeah.
20
Yeah.
sigma event, right? So when you have a singularity, there are no rules like rules of physics collapse in a black hole. There are no rules that
Yeah.
really apply to this situation, right? And so you have to find your own playbook to deal with it. And both of us actually had a very emotional discussion about, hey, there are two paths from here, right? You let go of the team, part of the team, and you cut costs to that extent where you're going to be able to survive this for that period, or you find a solution together with the team, where people make sacrifices, and the sacrifice has to start from the top, right? So, and historically, we've always gone with the second route because we've seen that in crisis, when you stand up as a leader and you tell your team what you're going through, most of the time people will rally around you and say, hey, how can we help
Sure.
ride the storm. So we had a discussion with our leadership team where we said, look, we are going to do 100% pay cut for ourselves, and we are requesting you to take a deep pay cut, right? So that we are able to survive this, and then we may have to also do pay cuts for the rest of the team because we don't see any other way we can survive for the next 6 months, right? And the
Right.
team was very supportive from the word go, right? And they said, we are in this together, and whatever is needed to be done, let's do that as long as people have minimum subsistence. People were
Sure.
willing to say that, let's figure out ways in which we don't need to let go people. In fact, even though we were inclined to say that, there might be no work for certain people for a few months, why do we need them? But this crisis is different. Yeah, this is a humanitarian crisis. This is not a typical capitalist crisis where you take a cold-blooded call and you say, this is it, and let's move on, right? I mean, because these people can't find jobs easily. They can't.
Yeah.
Sitting at home, it's very depressing, anyways, to just sit at home and have nothing to do. So
Hmm.
you don't want to be taking a call which leads to even more, let's say, mental agony for people, not just running out of money, but also emotionally disturbed for that period. So we kind of bit the bullet and said that we're just gonna find a path that gets us there without letting go of people, even if it means if it's 6 months down, if things don't improve, right, and you know travel is even more deeply impacted.
Yeah.
We may all go down together, but that's the risk we are willing to take, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
and
And
it was really
Rajni,
heartening. It was really heartening to see, once we took that call, a few people who came forward and said that in the current scheme of things, we don't have anything to do. Like our roles are completely redundant, and they volunteered to say that, I'm going to learn something new. So, somebody who's doing performance marketing said that he learned data science, and they started learning and contributing. So it was, we were surprised that something like this was happening with us. And looking back, the only lesson we learned through all of this is that in all these tough situations, that you have to be extremely transparent with the team. And bad news has to always travel faster than good news, in both directions, whether you're dealing with your investors or stakeholders, or you're dealing with your employees. And this is what happened in this scenario. People, because it helps us build that trust with the team, right? So, and like we said, it's extremely important to also expose your vulnerability. I mean, it doesn't matter, you might be the founders, but founders are not superhumans end of the day. And
sure.
in moments
And
like these, that's when you share your vulnerabilities, and that makes the team come together. It makes them
and
actually help you, right? It's a big great way of seeking help.
and this is, I think, your culture building over 5 years, 10 years comes into play and will become a more important key area as the startups go forward.
Exactly. I mean, we feel
Absolutely.
that this is a great way of seeking help, and this has always helped us get out, not only just get out of
Sure.
situation, but come out stronger at the other end.
Sure. Now, if we delve into more slightly technical conversation, and Rajneesh, from the tech perspective, you're the CTO. What were the early signs from a consumer behavior perspective, be it a drop in a particular category, or more customers reaching out for the refund? Were there key visible signs? Of course, we know it fundamentally, but from a tech perspective, could you see clear spikes and surges where you can say, "Hey, this is going to burst right now"?
So, like we said in the beginning, for us, we were not seeing any dip in demand, or any significant
Sure.
dip in demand. On the contrary, I think we were seeing travel actually, people traveling a lot more than they were in the month of February. And the reason was that, once these rumors started to come out that there could eventually be a lockdown, I think the first 2 weeks of March, people were mostly homebound, and there were a lot of people traveling from tier one cities to tier three, tier four cities, and which is what kind of sustained, not just sustained, but it actually led to a spurt in growth, of bookings. What did happen was that, as soon as the lockdown happened, we were seeing a lot of surge in calls coming in, customer support queries where people wanted to cancel, reschedule, and nobody was prepared for this, both from a technical perspective, or from a human resource perspective. And fortunately for us, we had just launched the second version of our AI chatbot, Tara, which was able to handle a lot of such queries in an automated fashion. So, we didn't have to throw a lot of people at the problem, and we were able to get out of it a little better, right? And we were able to serve our customers better than some of the other folks out there, which is what kind of saved us. It was just in the nick of time, and it is just fortunate that we were able to launch it at that point of
So,
time.
so that's the past. If we talk about current and let's say, next 3 to 4 months of future, and I know it's very hard to predict right now, how do you guys see consumer behavior changing in whatever way? And why I'm asking is because a lot of startups working on the similar lines may take some insights and may be able to build accordingly.
Yeah, so I think there'll be a few irreversible changes in behavior, right? And some of those are obvious that I think the mindset of people towards remote working or work from home is going to change dramatically. I mean, we are seeing that certain teams in our company actually are working at the same level or more, even higher levels of productivity than they were earlier, despite the fact that they're sitting at home, right? And one would not have imagined. So it's like the perfect A/B test for work from home, right, has just happened. And I think that that's going to be net beneficial for many companies, because if you don't really need to invest in assets, right, and if you can actually deploy people from across the world, because that also means you can hire people literally from across the world and make things happen, right? Because it doesn't matter where people are. I think it just changes the way people might end up building companies in the world going forward, right? And a lot of companies already were being built that way, but I think the norm was not that so far, and it might just become the norm for certain kinds of businesses to be built this way. The other thing we feel
No,
is obviously travel. Travel is at the center of this crisis, right? It travel, the way it feels and looks like, might just change the way it did in 9/11's case, right, where unprecedented levels of security searches were introduced. There were multiple tiers of, like, if you go to the US, you are frisked at least twice before you board the plane, and there are
sure.
random checks, and there are many other things. So similarly, I think at least for international travel in the foreseeable future, I think there will be mandatory COVID testing, and with those rapid testing or economical testing kits that are being deployed. We saw something that Emirates is doing already yesterday, right? And I think that will become the norm across the world. And for domestic, I think what China did, we'll have to implement here as well, whereby some kind of health status being verified at the point of boarding, to make sure that not just temperature screening, maybe just how much of a risk you're coming from, just like Arogya Setu app already does. I think those sort of things will really help in moving things forward once the lockdown is lifted.
So as you mentioned China, right? So and we all know that implementing that model in India is not easy. It's not a child's play. Privacy concerned, XYZ. There's so many variables in that. And having said that, India, is a very train focused. A lot of group mobility happens in buses and trains. A lot of people together. So with the safety thing coming in mind, do you think a major portion of users will move to more self-drive options of sorts, and hence OTAs will have to figure out new strategies to bring in more options? Because the safety concern and group mobility going down overall, or do you think that India as a country is still far away and will get back online, doesn't matter?
I think the social distancing implementation on all these modes of transportation will have their own unique challenges, right? So on planes, they're talking about killing the middle seat, right? And maybe having other such, in-plane social distancing. Buses and trains, I think it's much harder to do. Trains at least should be the hardest to do. So yeah, maybe self-drive, intercity cabs, etc. And if buses are able to find some way to do this social distancing in a profitable way, I mean, maybe that could take off. But of course, on flights, my view is that as long as there is aggressive testing slash temperature checks, we may end up and maybe we restrict it to low risk categories. So maybe we don't let senior citizens fly for a while, right? Maybe we don't let people who have heart conditions and other such high risk groups actually fly for a bit, right? That can contain the potential damage.
No.
But
So
I think I would side with being cautious. Like I know it affects our own business, but even when the lockdown lifts, I think people should exercise caution and travel only for essential needs till we bring down the number of cases dramatically. So I don't foresee this happening overnight. It will take a few months.
So like you said, for your own business and similar businesses, MMTs of the world, and again, I'm not putting all in the same bucket, but similar buckets. So for the businesses like you, don't you think if efficiency will go down, and cost will go up, like killing the middle seat, or the Indian Railways changing the way they work, or the buses change the way they work, cost going up, how the margins are going to play out in next 6 months to 1 year horizon? Will you guys introduce more margin products in order to make sure you are sustainable, because volumes will go down? So what will happen on the business model side? Or it is too early to think about that?
Look, I think what's clear is that in the short to midterm, capacity will not look the same as it looked before, right? Which automatically means fares going up. However, you have a reverse trend, which is oil prices being at a
Yes,
historical low, which may help bring the fares back to where they were before, right? And not dramatically different. That's my view on it.
hmm,
Despite having lower capacity, we may end up with similar fares as they existed earlier, because we may still be able to sustain at levels. But I think the bigger challenge is like how quickly can we build the confidence, right? Because the confidence to travel has been lost, right? And it's more important, no matter, even if full capacity was available, assume that everything was looking better and the cases were going down and full capacity was available. The bigger challenge will be, can we convince everybody to start traveling again, right? And that requires, I think, a different level of trust building in the procedures we are putting in place for testing and segregation, and maybe even quarantine near airports in case there are cases detected. All those infrastructural changes have to be brought into place before we build the confidence. Plus, we have to maybe come up with innovative products. We just launched something called ixigo Assured, where we are assuring a full refund, even if you cancel for whatever reason. So even when the lockdown lifts and you decide to book a
right.
flight, but then you realize, hey, I want to change my mind for whatever reason, right? Could be a health and safety reason, or it could be any other reason. You don't want the money to be stuck in credit shells, or to be not fully refundable, right? So we came up with a product with the insurance company to make sure that people can actually get a full refund just by paying a very small, maybe 199, 299 sort of price point, right? So yeah, I mean, I think we have to build that confidence back as an industry. That's the challenge we have, and not just for us, but the tourism boards as well.
But
And
overall, I think the demand is going to go down, especially if you look at corporate sector. Any non-essential travel, because people have figured out that if they can manage
yeah,
with conferences which are online, then why go for travel. So that is something which is irreversible, and that has happened already. So you're going to expect a lot of dip on the demand side as well, irrespective of whatever happens. And for leisure travel, like we said, I mean, it will take time to build some confidence, and it's really going to depend on how safe the infrastructure makes it for people to build that
sure.
confidence.
And Rajesh, before we go, further, and I know maybe there's not a specific answer, but when we talk about scaling up the tech solutions to handle the demand, and be it in the good cases of Zooms of the world, or some challenging cases like the travel industry, how do a lot of startups right now who are stuck at scaling up the demand from a tech perspective, is there any framework they can follow or should follow, or how should one go about it? Because that's another big challenge.
Like, I think there are two kinds of businesses at this point in time: people who are experiencing lack of demand, and people who are benefiting from it. And people like conferencing softwares, tools, etc., ed tech, etc. These are people who are benefiting from it. For these people, I think the challenge of scaling up the infrastructure is huge, and I think this is a test where companies which have built a solid DevOps at the back end are able to kind of scale easily and survive through this, and hence reap the benefits of this unprecedented demand. However, for people like us, I think, as they say, when the fishermen don't go to the sea, they mend their net. So for us, it's about building for the future, right? And see if we can probably garner revenue from different sources, novel sources like entertainment, or for that matter, games, etc. All these categories. So What we figured out is that on our product tech side, our ability to deploy certain things without having to kind of write a single line of code was really helpful. We were able to kind of build an entire COVID center and deploy it to our apps across our user base of 30 million people, without even having to write a single line of code, right? And no app releases needed. So such flexibility at this point in time is crucial, because we saw our daily active users go down at a very rapid pace, because obviously there's no reason for
Yeah,
people to come to the app today, because if there's no way to book any travel, why would they come back, right? So we had to
sure.
kind of quickly react to that and build reasons for people to come back, whether it is in the form of gaming, videos, entertainment, book insurance, or COVID related information. We were able to build all of that, and today if you go to our app, you will see that all those things are live and running, and it's driving a lot of engagement for us. So at least there is some source of revenue in the form of ads and selling
Sure.
insurance, and other ancillary products that we can.
So as a lot of brands are saying, even if the times are tough from a particular company perspective, acquiring users and engaging users is going to be the biggest changing factor in next 3 months. So that is something what even the people who can't sell right now, brands can't sell right now, should keep on doing.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
Absolutely.
fair enough.
it's something we are doing as well. So you might have noticed that we've kept up the pace of coming up with creative content, related to the situation, related to travel, related to the good news, because there's not enough good news going around, but there is enough good news when you look at how the environment and the flora and fauna is flourishing out there. So we've kind of done very interesting videos around the situation, to stay with the engagement side. And in our own apps, we've launched a COVID center, like Rajneesh said. We also have a COVID information center with the updated information. We've added entertainment and games, so that people can, especially in our train app, we already had that for the on the train mode, right? So we brought it to the forefront, because if you're not taking a trip, maybe you can still spend your time on that, right? And we have seen,
Sure.
that really helps.
Sure. And before we, get into the questions, start taking questions, I will still take one more attempt to understand the consumer behavior. Let's take a different lens. So, can we figure out something right now that, any tier two, tier three users doing any particular kind of bookings, and we can draw an insight from that. So what we are trying to understand here is how is India 2 and India 3 reacting from a price point view, from the, their capability of willing to commit to travel too much down the line. Is something like that happening? It's gone completely blank as of now.
So
I think,
right
when,
now,
yeah,
sorry, okay,
sure,
go ahead.
sorry, go. Okay, so I was saying that the migrant population, one of the things we expect will happen is, whenever the lockdown lifts, there will be a huge amount of migrant labor that is still stuck in the large cities, that will
Yeah,
want to move on the buses and trains back to their hometowns. So it's like pent up demand, which couldn't really take the last bus out, right? And we still feel that a lot of them will want to go back, because they might have lost their jobs, or they feel more safe or more comfortable back home. And we expect that to kind of have a big peak in the first few weeks after the lockdown is lifted. Yeah, Rajneesh, go ahead.
sure.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the same thing, because we saw similar trend in the beginning. Like I said, people kind of, mass exodus happening from tier one, tier two to tier three and four cities. The people were homebound, and the reverse, will happen obviously later on when the lockdown gets, lifted progressively. The other thing we saw was that there was this sense of urgency, and we saw that a lot of demand that was on the trains and buses side actually moved to flight side. And because we had a lot of tier 3 4 users, because of our trains app, and we saw flights demand actually going up for us, whereas overall in the industry it was going down significantly. And that was something that was very unique to our situation, because we were probably the only online travel agency in the market who had both tier 1 and tier 3 tier 2 audience in
Mm-hmm.
our user base. So that was something
Mm-hmm.
very unique to our use case. But other than that, I think this whole thing about people moving from tier 1 to tier 2, especially people who are working on daily wages, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
that is going to kind of outline the demand going forward.
Sure. So let's take one question before we get into the B2B side and few trends on that side. Nayan says the government of India relaxing travel restrictions. So I want to broaden the question and ask, from a policy perspective, and I'm sure you guys are talking to various stakeholders internally on the government side as well, where government is stepping up on the health and different other sectors very proactively. What interventions from government one should expect or you guys are expecting, and how it is going to change or de-stress the current situation from a travel sector perspective?
Sure. So I think government has announced at least one stimulus package which was more targeted towards the I would say the poor or the lower mid or middle income groups. We were awaiting a travel specific stimulus, at least for aviation and the travel agency tour operator industry, because you know that there are about 50 million jobs in the country that depend on this sector, right? And the assessment is that if no stimulus is announced, at least 20% of those jobs are not going to be around, right? Within the next, and we're talking about days or weeks here, right? So maybe within the next 2 to 4 weeks, we do expect some sort of stimulus to be announced by the government, even if it's just for the most vulnerable segment of this market, because it's important. And a lot of this is unorganized, right? So it's not just the travel agents who are large or OTAs, etc. A lot of unorganized people who depend on the tourism industry in India. So I think that's something we expect the government to step into. In fact, just yesterday, we had a discussion with the government where a lot of travel industry folks engaged directly with some of the ministers. And we do remain hopeful that there will be some support. But beyond that support, I think the government is doing its best, right? I mean, at least we've seen that they are listening to us. They are taking some progressive measures, and I think the best measure they did was to lock down the country early. We are probably ranked as the most strictest lockdown in the world right now. If required and if it is necessary for saving lives, if we need to extend it further, we stand behind the government, supporting them in that cause. So we leave it. We're not experts. I think the country is in good hands, and those people will decide how the lockdown gets lifted.
Sure. And especially travel is looking very grim from an investor point of view as of now, and in the top three sectors, of course, where they're not looking to invest. And but like you guys started MS different crisis. So if I bring an economic angle to this, and we move in the post-corona world now, so do you think still the opportunities lies for travel tech startups? It can be B2B, B2C, unique solutions can be built. So let's say, are we talking about mobile usage of passports, boarding passes, keyless hotel entries, biometric gesture hotels, or facial biometric, which is in China. So do you think these kind of solutions are still yet to come, and will the industry and investors will be receptive to that?
Rajnish, you want to take that?
See, I think generally they say that companies which are born in crisis have longer legs than companies otherwise, and it is true for any crisis. This crisis is not an exception to that. It's true that anything that can utilize what is happening today and mean any sort of contactless things that people can bring to ensure more safety and confidence of travelers, whether it is in the hotel sector or is it in the airline industry, it's going to
So,
be,
so
people are going to take that.
Rajat, just to interrupt before you answer this completely. So I'm asking this question from a business perspective. So can we highlight few trends for the startups who are trying to build in this industry going forward? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So like we were saying, see, the demand is not going to come back anytime soon. It's going to take some time. So if you talk about investor confidence, it's going to go down for travel for sure. And, that is something that's not going to recover anytime soon. However, if you look at it from an opportunity perspective, there's still, innovative startups can still disrupt. And there is an opportunity for people who can come back into the market once the dust settles, because there might be a lot of people who won't be around once that happens, and hence there is a larger share of market that can be grabbed. From that perspective, it is still kind of an opportunity that people have. It's just that you need to kind of be more innovative and figure out ways in which you can leverage this situation, this opportunity to build something based on that, right? And there could be multiple examples, like you mentioned, anything which can make things more online, security passes. People are working on e-pass within the Arogya Setu app, which is supposed to be the passport for people going forward. Uh, and hello, can you hear me?
Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi. So I think first we need a startup to
Sorry.
fix the internet problems of the country right now. That is the biggest, uh,
Yeah.
you know, opportunity right now. But yeah, sorry. I think yeah, we can go going. So again, Alok, I'm just trying to understand the trend from, if not B2C, from a B2B perspective
Yeah.
for
Let
the
me let
startups who are
me
trying to
add.
work.
Yeah, let me add to what Rajni just said. I think there is an opportunity to come up with contactless solutions, right? So if you talk about hospitality, right, I was seeing in China, they have built solutions that allow you to use the lift in a contactless manner, right? Now they have a QR code you can just scan in the lift and press the floor number in your app, and the lift takes you to that floor. Right now, one can imagine, all such contact events today that can be made contactless, right? And that could be an interesting opportunity in the entire travel and hospitality sector. Also, I think the opportunity is for, the hospitality sector specifically to figure out, which are the types of properties that can really work in the post-COVID world, right? So, anything where the density of rooms is not very high and where you have, more space in the property might still work, because if you have independent huts or villas, or if you have some more space around every room, or maybe you are only selling every alternate room, but there could be a way in which you bounce back sooner by implementing social distancing within those properties. Last but not the least, use of technology for uh, providing some kind of clearance to travel, right? uh, like the Arogya Setu app is trying to do, right, with the e-pass and all those things that are being implemented right now. I think that is super critical, and I think that might end up creating an ecosystem around itself, right? So a lot of things might just integrate into that mechanism to provide a go no go, and to warn people in advance about zones that they need to avoid, etc. uh, that's the only way we can build confidence back in the industry, and that's a opportunity for startups.
And if we talk about hotels or hospitality as an industry, so there are multiple thoughts. One thought is, because of the economic recession coming in or already here, the budget hotel category is going to pick up at large globally and in
Hmm.
India. But the other argument is, especially the business travelers are going to stick with the brands they know and they trust and they believe. And similarly, the prices of hotels are going to go down in the five-star category as well. So it will be at par or similarly at par with the budget hotels. So how this is going to unfold in next 6 months from a business user category, if we talk about in particular, and then the leisure travel, if we talk about in particular.
Right. So I think, look, from a business travel perspective, the MICE segment, meetings, incentives, conferences, exhibitions, events, will remain impacted for a while, because people will avoid large gatherings, right? So my assessment is, at least till the end of this calendar year, we are going to see events and conferences and exhibitions, etc., being postponed.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe on the domestic side, it might restart even sooner than that, but for international, I'm pretty sure that this calendar year we are not going to see much action on MICE. Hopefully, on domestic we get started by October, is my assessment. But for corporate, outside of that, I think the habit change that I talked about might impact 10 to 20% of corporate travel going forward, right? So there might be certain use cases where people say, okay, is a meeting even required, right? Can I not just do a Zoom call or a Hangout and do meeting over that and still do business with this person, right? And I think that means that's a fundamental shift, right? For a large number of MNCs, they might come up with policies where they say that for these kind of meetings, just do a call, right?
Hmm.
Whereas for these kind of meetings, you can actually go and get on a plane.
Hi,
So
Rajneesh.
one will see.
Hi.
Yeah.
So one will see, how these policies are introduced by large corporates when it comes to business travel. But there will be, some changes in what constitutes the requirement to actually even travel for a meeting, right?
And what will happen to the business models like the price comparison website? And I know there's no definitive answer, but these models are going to take a huge hit going forward also because consumers don't want to compare prices anymore since they're not going out.
Yeah, so I mean, look, we stopped being a meta search or a price comparison site ourselves. It's been like almost 7-8
Yeah.
months now. And like our assessment anyway last year was that on mobile and especially in a market where you're already able to get to a large amount of traffic just by targeting the right audience, you do not really need to create another layer for that kind of audience, right? So when I talk about the train traveler who has never experienced any OTA in his life, and starts using ixigo for their train utility searches and for their train bookings, and then is able to do flight bookings through us, we don't need to introduce yet another brand to them. So that was the reason why we went down the OTA model. Even on e-commerce, I think price comparison guys right now are kind of struggling because affiliate commissions have been reduced by Amazon and everyone else. And I think that model will also impact players like Google because
Hmm.
they've been
Hmm.
largely
Yeah.
playing in that space.
Right.
Um, I think, look, here's the thing. Going forward in the post-COVID world, anyone who's able to build these assurances that I talked about in a very unique way, right? Whether through proposition, whether through how their property looks like in a hotel, if all your rooms are distant from each other, it's great, right? If it's a new kind of cabin class on a flight that allows you to do that, for a premium, why not, right? So I think there will be ways in which people will leverage, the post-COVID opportunity for the next 12 months. But again, I'm an optimist. I think somebody will find a vaccine, and if not this year, next year, things will return back to normal.
So, and I was talking to Amit from Yulu, and we are talking about micro mobility. So, definitely. So, you are saying the UI UX of a lot of these large group mobility transportation services is going to change, and there's a blue sky opportunity for startups to play some room there.
Absolutely. There's so much you can do to build more assurance and trust, right?
Hmm.
And everybody should be thinking about that right now in the mobility space.
Sure. If we pick this question, and again, intracity and intercity, I'm sure you have answered it in different ways. But if you want to take another guess, what are the changes you think will happen in passenger transportation, intracity and intercity in India after the pandemic? Group mobility going away, or slightly being cautious?
Look, I think intercity is where we operate, so that's simpler to say what's likely to happen there. I think, look, people for the next few months will travel only for use cases that they cannot avoid, right? Whether it is emergencies, whether it is supplies, like getting supplies from one place to another, whether it is and there are use cases. I mean, there's if you have a funeral in your family, you need to attend it, right? Or if there's an important occasion you need to be at, and if it's your dad's 80th birthday, maybe you want to be there. But again, you might also risk infecting him, so people might think twice about it. So I think it's not going to be the same, like I said, till we get the checks and balances at the airports and railway stations and bus stations in place, till we feel comfortable sending our own loved ones. I can't expect my customers to travel, if I'm uncomfortable sending my own loved ones on the flight or the bus or the train. And I think we might be several months away from that.
Sure. Rajnish, you want to add on that one?
I think right now, the safest bet would definitely be for people, who have their own vehicle to self-drive. I think there's nothing safer than that right now, and that's the next safest option compared to not traveling at all, right? So unless it's completely essential, people won't travel. Flights, we think flights, obviously going to be more safer in that respect, because public transport, intra-city both, and is going to be extremely difficult for people to and I don't know how the government is going to open that up. Even if it opens up gradually, probably I think mass public transport probably would be the last thing that would open up in this context. However, intercity travel within different contexts can open, whether it is through cabs, private cabs, or buses, if they can implement something where they would allow, for example, in flights, they're trying to do diagonal seats only. So if they have some sort of a scenario where they do something similar on buses as well, then, intercity travel might be. Trains, again, is definitely going to be a lot more tough because of the volume of people who travel. And I think no sort of measures would be enough to ensure social distancing there. It's extremely tough. It's extremely tough. So
But
Sure.
I'll
I
give
guess in the
you
short
an
term, yeah.
example. Like on taxis, when SARS happened, a lot of countries in Southeast Asia and China, you might have noticed that the taxi driver sits in a little a plastic shielded compartment of his own, right?
Yes.
You have a transparent plastic sheet. So, I mean, when when we visited China the first time, we were kind of laughing about it, but then, it seems like the most obvious thing to do in this crisis as well, right? So you might see the Olas and Ubers of the world adapting to some of these measures. You might see intercity taxis adapting to these measures, where you have the
Oh,
latest temperature of the driver, as well as
yes.
physical boundaries inside the cab. That's the only way to build confidence, in my view. There's no two ways to go about it.
So
Yeah,
Vaibhav
I mean,
Chopra has
like the
asked the.
e-pass.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
sorry,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Go
Go ahead.
ahead,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no. Go ahead. I'll
No, so I was saying
complete
that
the.
the e-pass is going to be fundamental here. I think it might have to be opened up by the government for app developers to kind of use and implement that in their own systems. And one of those things could be that, drivers and people who are within in this context would have this available online, even pre-booking, right? Somebody who books a cab would know exactly the status of the driver at any point of time using the same application, right? So those are some of the areas that might boost confidence, because and again, this would need. I'm pretty sure that Arogya Setu would probably end up being the biggest app in the country, the most downloaded app in the next 1 month, and hence they would have all the data to ensure that, and eventually open up an API for other app developers to use that and leverage that.
Sure. And one question I was trying to understand from you, especially 3 months, 6 months down the line, do you think, of course, trust is very important for any business, but the service quality, let's be it the refunding customers or talking to customers, and we have seen in B2C companies, especially when they scale up, there are glitches, there are hiccups, and people not exactly get what they want all the time. So, do you think that will be a key to turning around this business, where consumer stickiness is the main key area which is going to change the whole business for anyone?
Oh, absolutely. Look, people remember for a very, very long time how you treat them in moments of crisis, right? And we are not boasting about our own customer service here, but the fact is that everyone in our company for a few weeks was working on customer support, because there were just too many queries coming in. And the fact is that despite all that, I think our NPS would have gone down during that period, because you just can't. I don't think
Service
any
everyone.
OTA or any airline could have handled the kind of load that we got. Nobody has a. I mean, who models a situation where cancellations are 10 times the number of bookings, right? It's usually the opposite, right? So I think it's very important in all these things. Actually, during a crisis, it's important to be a human first, right? And to have that empathy of looking at the situation like any other human being, right? We try to build in policies that ensure that empathy, and we've tried to push our airline partners, towards that as well, or at least request them to act in the same manner. And I think now with the new policy where the government is encouraging refunds instead of credit shells, that's going to help. I think the railways has been very, very supportive. They've given refunds on time, and we expect them to continue doing that. So I think as long as uh, everyone in the industry acts in a manner where we have that empathy, and we are kind of being good
Sure,
humans before being good businessmen,
sure.
I think things can sort themselves out.
So Vaibhav Chopra has asked a very direct question. Sir, hi sir, how much
Sure.
decrease in total revenue are you expecting in the current financial year compared to the previous ones? And you can just give a broad range if at all.
It's one of those questions where it's so hard to give guidance. I wish I had the clarity at this time to give guidance, but the largest of companies are not able to give any guidance right now. I can tell you that the fiscal year that just ended, we grew almost 50% in revenue, and we brought down our losses to almost nothing, right? I mean, the last quarter was profitable, and but this obviously this year will be an uphill battle, right? So it's almost like starting from ground zero all over again, right? Because there have been the last few days, we've seen very, very, very minuscule number of bookings, right? I mean, you can literally round it off to zero in some cases, some categories, right? So
Sure.
so I think we are starting from zero is what one can assume, and we will get back hopefully back to 100% within this fiscal year, right? And if that happens, I think everybody will be happy in the travel industry.
Sure. Anu Grover has asked, hi Alok and Rajneesh, how do you guys plan to cope up with current trends in terms of cost? We need to become a cockroach. Cockroach travel is the most impacted along with retail and your inputs will be useful. So maybe, I'm sure you have already said it earlier, but if you want to give a different take on this one, retail and travel and cost is what Anu is asking.
Yeah, so on cost, I think Rajneesh had mentioned, like, obviously you need to go back and relook at all your contracts. We even had a discussion. The landlords got waivers for our rent. We went to all the service providers we work with, and most of them have given us either a waiver or a discount for the next few months. And I think it's a situation where that empathy exists in people you work with, because they've worked with you for several years and they know that this is a crisis where everybody is sort of being hurt. So you can get some kind of cost benefit there, going and helping you to survive. On the compensation side, again, we have the support of our team to actually implement some salary cuts that everybody was on the board with, and hopefully we move back to the normal salaries within a few months, because that's what we expect, everyone wants, right? So what's the next question? MICE
So,
and event company.
yeah. So if I want to take a different take on this one, so one of the terms I recently heard is FOGO, fear of going out, in one of the Mark Manson's newsletter. So do you think this FOGO will become the synonymous to FOMO going forward and will change the consumer psyche for a long time?
Yeah, we all have it right now for sure.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, I think I'll pick up the next question on this, but I think domestic, what we've seen even just before the crisis is still the last days, just before the lockdown, people were still traveling, right? And this country has been more resilient, and I think there are more risk takers, because there are certain use cases for travel which are related to putting bread on the table, right? And I think once things open up, and hopefully in a month's time, we are talking about a situation where at least the segment that looks at travel as utility, right? And our assessment is that it's at least 25% of all travel, right, which is for a purpose which is not leisure, or not necessarily so-called corporate, right, but more about going to another place to write an exam, going to maybe a hospital in another city. Like, there are so many such use cases, right, where that should start happening. So domestic will bounce back, and domestic is what will save us, right? Compared to many other countries, if you look at Singapore, etc., we are in a stronger position from a domestic market being large enough to support the travel players here. right?
So there's one question I also want to ask exactly. So I was reading somewhere where a lot of countries are promoting once this lockdown opens up is domestic tourism. So do you think that
Yeah,
will play a big in favor of what you just mentioned? And is
very
it going to
important,
pick up?
right? Extremely important. And the best part there is that there are some parts of our country totally unaffected or relatively quite unaffected by the crisis, right? You have the entire northeast which is still open, right? Very few cases, not rising as much. And as long as there are strict measures that they will put in place to ensure they don't import cases from other states, but as long as those measures are in place, great opportunity for them to market themselves, right?
Sure.
There are many such opportunities that exist there, and I think some of the remote and offbeat locations. I was discussing this with somebody else yesterday, but some of the more remote, offbeat, and maybe like Rajneesh said, you can drive to those places from the city, right? Maybe 50 kilometers away. You can drive to it, and it's in a remote location, relatively offbeat. People will have the confidence to do those kind of things first when it comes to
So,
leisure
so,
travel.
so, do you think from a tech perspective, experiential travel discovery platforms which already existed are going to pick up pace because people need to find out what's around them in terms of experiences?
Yeah, I think discovery becomes even more important in the current scheme of things because almost all technologies which are able to ensure that you can experience a place even before you get there will become very, very important. And we've been working on that in the past as well, although we didn't see a lot of traction there because obviously the focus was more on transactional services. But now I think it becomes more important than ever because for people, since international is not an option anymore, and it won't be for a while now, I think people will have to discover more their own
Hmm.
country, and I think domestic demand is going to grow really strong on the back of that sort of travel.
Sure. And one last thing before we summarize, I want to touch upon is M&A, right? So do you think a lot of consolidation in general in the sector are we going to see?
Look, usually downturns are time when M&A activity does pick up because there may be some companies that may not, be able to survive without, getting acquired or merged. So we may see some of that, but we don't expect to see any major big time M&As happening at this
Hmm.
point, given everybody is trying to conserve cash. And even if they
Hmm.
happen, they might have more stock and less cash in those kind of deals, right? So what might continue to happen is more act hire kind of deals where you see good teams who are willing to join a larger cause and work towards it, or you might see situations where mergers happen without cash being exchanged, right? Those things happen even in the last downturn. So we do expect some of those things to happen because if the market is not large enough, sometimes it does make sense to join forces.
Sure. So just to summarize, we talked about few trends. We talked about new micro travel products, which may add up to more margins given the quantities will go down. We talked about the opportunity in the UI UX space in general or design space in general when it comes to reconfiguring the public transport. We talked about the data play, be it through the Arogya Setu app or something else, and what can be built upon that in terms of transparency. We also talked about experiential tourism and discovery going up. Anything you want to add in this?
Well, I think we touched upon almost all the things. One of the
Sure.
things I think in general will happen is that a lot more emphasis from governments on healthcare and a lot more
Mhm.
emphasis on insurance, right? Not
Hmm.
just travel insurance, but also health insurance will start to happen, given that people suddenly realize that some of these singularity events, unforeseen events can happen, and nobody really models for those. We may also see things like virtual tourism or VR, AR-led, travel pick up till the time it's not safe to, travel again. All right.
Hmm.
So we do expect that to also start showing up.
Sure. Great. I think we had a great session. And guys, if we have more questions, we'll try to get it answered from Alok and Rajneesh in a offline setup and get back to you. So thanks for joining us. And thanks, guys, for being with us in these tough times. And I hope we all come out of this together and we start traveling again for sure. So thank you, guys, for joining us.
Thank you, Abba.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.